Hello, how are you? I always ask that as I expect you to answer. How are you? Nobody? Good. Okay. So anyway, today we're going to talk the beginning of political parties. So again, remember this entire unit is what's called linkage institutions. So linkage institutions are things that link people to government. So we have elections, political parties, the media, and interest groups. And we've gone mostly through elections. I kind of like really jump around in this unit because to me, the way the book is aligned doesn't make that much sense. It's just my brain that works differently. I don't know, but it just seems like certain things fit better in different areas than others. Like a lot of times elections and political parties sort of fuse together, obviously, right? So, because one of the main functions of political parties is to win elections. So we're going to kind of start with political parties, get through a little bit of this, and then go back to elections in terms of like voter disenfranchisement and like problems that we still have with elections and voting, and then come back to political parties. So probably by like Monday, when we get back in school, we'll be talking about political parties and the process of like redistricting, which is always interesting. Called gerrymandering. Okay, so anyway, all right. So political parties, chapter 6. Here we go. And of course, we already know quite a bit about political parties just from an ideological standpoint from the first unit that we did. So unit 4, which talked about political beliefs and behaviors, right? So we kind of have a pretty good idea, at least, after taking that I Side With quiz a while ago. Feels like last year, probably like 2 weeks ago. But kind of where the different parties stand on different issues for the most part. So we kind of take that and extend it out. We're not really talking ideology in this chapter so much. We're talking about how political parties function. Okay. So people rely on parties, and that honestly might be most of the reason why they still exist. And it's really because, people complain about the two-party system, but people aren't trying to actually change the two-party system either in any real measurable way that's going to gain any steam. And we'll talk several slides in about like how much would have to change in the way our government functions in order for, like, if political parties, like if our two-party system didn't exist anymore. But people really do rely on political parties at the level of elections, right? So if you don't know, and we've talked about this in class before, if you don't know who a candidate is, but you see a D or an R next to their name, essentially probably kind of what they stand for, right? Because you're familiar with what's called their party platform. And the party platform is a set of issues that a party has decided they're going to care about. And that doesn't mean they don't care about other things, but it's what kind of makes up their policy agenda. And a lot of times it has to do with their beliefs on issues that are important to the time. So a lot of time is spent talking now and in recent years about healthcare. And should we have universal healthcare, like single payer healthcare, or at least government funded healthcare, Medicare for all who want it, no Medicare, all privatized insurance, right? So there's a lot of different sides you could be on in that argument. But the argument of healthcare, like the idea of healthcare, makes it to both parties' platforms, just in different ways, because it's something that's very important to people right now that are in our society. The environment makes it onto both parties' platforms. Deregulation or regulation makes it onto both parties' platforms. The pro-choice, pro-life issue makes it onto both parties' platforms. Immigration makes it onto both. But again, like the issue makes it to both, but they have different beliefs on those issues, usually, right? And so if you know that, then you can kind of pretty reliably vote for a party who you mostly believe in, right? But the party platform exists to create what's called a policy agenda. So your party platform, hopefully you can enact it if your party gets into office. Now, there are times when that's more difficult to do than others. So like, let's say that a president wins and is a Republican, but that Congress still has a Democrat majority, right? Or vice versa. Democrat president, Republican majority Congress. It's called divided government. So you can want your policy agenda to pass all you want, but it might not happen, particularly if your party has, pretty extreme views one way or another on things. If you're centrist, maybe a little bit more, but that doesn't really seem like where the tide of the country is right now, is very centrist. But a party platform is set at a national convention. And so, there's like a formal vote that's taken on a party platform. And so, the people who are at the convention say, yep, this is what we want. This is what we're going to focus on for, these 4 years or whatever. And it's basically that, whoever's running for president, like that's who sets it, right? Like that's what the national platform is for. If you don't win the presidency, your platform as a party still exists, but you sort of carry it out in a different way. It's supposed to be super easy if you have united government, meaning that, the White House, the party in the White House is the same as the party who's a majority in Congress, especially if you have both houses of Congress. But that happened to the president in the beginning of his term. So like he's elected in 2016 and in all of 2017 through the election of 2018, and then the turnover, that new term starting in 2019, the president had united government, completely united government. He had a Republican majority in both the House and the Senate. But the problem is that the president was not the same type of Republican that was in Congress. So he's, kind of this new branch of Republican, and a lot of like the old party brass were like, what on earth? Like, what is this? This is not our platform. But whoever's running for president, like that's who the platform is based on. And so the thing like build a wall, repeal and replace Obamacare, like that kind of stuff that the president ran on as a candidate makes its way onto the party platform. But Republicans had never really been thinking of like putting a lot of effort toward building a southern border wall. And so that's why that kind of took a long time to go through. And he ended up writing an executive order, like establishing a national emergency and writing an executive order to move money around to build it, because he couldn't get his own Congress, like people in his own party, to support that. So that was a very interesting time, because usually if you have united government, everything just sails right through, right? The only thing you have to worry about is if you have a different, ideologically different court. Okay, moving on. So, party time. That's not as fun as it sounds. So obviously we have our two major parties, as you know, Republican and Democrat. We have major-ish third parties, and they've kind of like brought things to the forefront during different times. So some parties will, raise up and then come back down. And some parties start as offshoots of a main party, like the Tea Party started as an offshoot of the Republican Party. It was a very, very, very conservative end of the Republican Party. A lot of Tea Party candidates ended up winning in 2010 midterms, and then again in 2012 and 14. So the Tea Party, they exist still, but not in, they've kind of just become part of the Republican Party a little bit more. They were really an offshoot before. So we have the Libertarian Party. They would probably fall in a conservative end of the spectrum from a size of government standpoint. But then they're also super heavily pro-choice. But it's not because that they have a moral, backing of pro-choice. It's that they don't think the government should get involved in anything. They believe the government should exist for defense of the nation, and that's about it. And then we have the Green Party, which is the very left end of, grew as an offshoot of the Democratic Party. People who thought that they weren't paying enough attention to environmental issues. And then we have just parties that have come up over time too, like the Reform Party has come up. And, as you guys know from doing your website project, we have like the U.S. Taxpayers Party and the Constitutional Law Party, or whatever the others are. I don't even know. Like, that's how much they don't really have an effect on an election this year. Of course, in 2016, there's a huge, the two minor parties had a huge effect. And even if their numbers didn't indicate it, they did. So it's not like a ton of people voted for Gary Johnson or Jill Stein in 2016, but it was enough that they pulled from each of their parties. All right, so benefits of a two-party system. I mean, it's just easier. It's a dumb benefit, right? But it is. It's easier in voting, right? And it's easier. I mean, look at you guys trying to look up information on these people. And you're like, who is this guy? Like, I can't even find anything, right? Like, our two major parties are so incredibly well funded that, it's just very, very easy to find information on these parties. And they share such a wide platform that, you are able to sort of, put people into a box based on that. So again, generally who you're voting for. And the parties do not shift often. They do. And that's like the end of this lesson for, when we get there today. This is not the end of the lesson. Don't stop watching right now. If you look at the time still left, I'm sure there's a lot. But the parties themselves don't shift in a dramatic way very often. And so, you can count on being, a member of that party or believing the same thing that whatever party it is believes, usually for about 50, 60 years, something like that. And then it's not even like we have to shift. It's just that seems that there's like every 50, 60 years or so, there's what's called a realigning election. The drawbacks to a two-party system, of course, like the lack of choice, obviously, right? And then this idea of like, people say, oh, I'm going to hold my nose and vote for, whoever. Like in 2016, people who were Democrats and would never vote for a Republican, but did not like Hillary Clinton were like, oh, I'm just going to hold my nose and vote for Hillary. And then the same thing on the other side. A lot of my friends who are very traditionally Republican, like fiscal Republicans, were like, I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Trump, so you just have to kind of do that. Like, you can't usually find a candidate that you really are like on board with. It's just whoever comes up with that's close enough to your ideology, right? You could also argue that entirely too much influence, not only the political system, but the way our government is run. Almost everything in our government is based off of political party. It's actually kind of insane. And then, just this idea, of course, that other voices aren't heard. Although, again, like I said, third parties what they do bring to the table is an influence on policy. So, like people who are what we call like kind of these fringe candidates, right? They might not have a snowball's chance in heck of winning, but they will bring to the forefront issues that people weren't necessarily that concerned with before. All right, most third-party votes ever. See, this is more fun if we're in class, you can guess, but we're not. So it was in 1992. A gentleman by the name of Ross Perot. There he is, Leadership for a Change, Ross Perot, 92. Ross Perot. So this is the first election. Like, I loved Reagan. Ronald Reagan was probably my favorite president of all time. Because I was like little. I was 2 years old when he got elected in 1980. And so he was really, the first president that I remember. But the first election that I remember is the 1992 election. And I remember watching the debates. And Ross Perot actually was polling high enough to get into the main stage debates, which doesn't usually happen. So you have to be polling at 15% in order to get onto the main stage. And so I remember watching these debates between Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Ross Perot. And it was George H.W. Bush, Bush 1. I don't think he made all the debate stages, but I specifically remember him being in one. And he's just a funny guy to listen to because he just has a very strange voice and he has like gigantic ears. And so, you know, as a, like, what would I have been, 14-year-old, I found him to be very funny. And if I could have voted back then, I probably would have voted for Ross Perot, and that's why you don't let 14-year-olds vote. So anyway, I mean, he had some interesting ideas. He like literally wanted to like fundamentally shift the way our country runs and wanted like a direct democracy via like electronic, right? Which is makes kind of sense now, like, okay, let's just throw everything on a Google form, right? But in 1992, like the internet didn't exist. And so there was not like, he was way ahead of his time in that, but he actually had no way at all of implementing it whatsoever. But he was a businessman and, you know, had just way more money than he knew what to do with. He was like Michael Bloomberg in the Democratic primary this year. She's like, no, I'll run for president. Why not? So he was a member of the Reform Party. But he got the most third-party votes ever in a presidential election. He got over 19 million votes, but he did not win one electoral vote. Not a one. That is impressive, just so you know, to win that many votes and then get absolutely shut out in the Electoral College. But he didn't campaign correctly. Like, he didn't win states. And as we know, that's how you win presidential elections. You have to win states in order to do that. And people who understand that are very successful. President Trump was very successful in that. You would not have thought that the margin was as close as it was, or you wouldn't have actually ever thought that Hillary Clinton would have won the popular vote by as many votes as she did. And I mean, because if you just look at the Electoral College, President Trump wiped the floor with her, right? But if you look at the popular vote, Clinton won by a lot, right? So it was like a few million votes. So it's just, it's so bizarre, like the way that things are done. Okay, third-party electoral votes. The last time a third-party candidate, so anybody besides a Democrat or Republican, won any electoral votes, who was it? I'll give you a hint. This is the map. This is in 1968. I don't know if any of you guys know that election well enough to know, but it was George Wallace. So there you go. He won almost 10 million votes and got 46 electoral votes. So again, look at that difference, right? So Ross Perot got 19 million votes and no electoral votes. Wallace got almost 10 million votes and 46 electoral votes because he concentrated them in here. So that was a smarter way to do things, right? I mean, it's still obviously not 270, but it's better than none, I guess. Okay, so here's the problem. Poor minor parties, right? They're looked at as spoilers. Ralph Nader got so famously very, very angry. I believe it was in 2016. So he ran as a Green Party candidate in 2000. And it was really like the beginning of the Green Party. Nobody had really heard of it before on like a national level. And Ralph Nader made a decent name for himself. Did not, I don't think, pulled well enough to get onto the debate stage, but you know, people knew who he was. And it is sad because he was a Green Party. So of course, remember, Green Party comes on a more liberal side. So people were saying that probably the people who voted for Nader would have voted for Gore had Nader not been in the race. And so people will say to Nader, well, you cost Gore the election. Like, you gave the election to George W. Bush. And Ralph Nader gets very upset when you say that. And it was, I do believe it was an interview in 2016. So that was the last time we had like a major third-party candidate in Gary Johnson and Jill Stein. And so he was on some news show, you know, talking about third-party candidates, and whoever was hosting it was like, well, don't you, you know, they're spoilers. Don't you think you were a spoiler in 2000? He's like, ah! Very upset. He's like, I'm not a spoiler. It's not fair to say that. I have just as much right to run as anybody else. And he's right, you know, but it's hard to not think that way because we've set up this two-party system such that nobody else will win. At least high office, right, in the presidency. Now you're like, well, but, Angus King and Bernie Sanders are independents. Yes, but they're also like pretty well-known Democrats. And so they, like, when they went independent, they had already been very, like, when Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, he ran as a Democrat for president because he knows if he would have run as an independent, he doesn't have the party machine behind him, right? He doesn't have a whole bunch of money that's going to be thrown at him to help him run this. So he knows that in order to successfully make a bid for these high offices, you have to identify with a party. They don't have to do it in their home states because everybody knows them, right? So like Bernie can run as an independent in the Senate race, in Vermont and still win. And Angus King can do the same in Maine, I believe. I want to say. I could be wrong on that. But anyway, they're so well known that they're going to win regardless because they have incumbency advantage. All right. Sorry. Anyway. And then so Ross Perot 92 with his 19 million votes. Ralph Nader in 2000, I'm not sure how many votes he got. And then Gary Johnson, Jill Stein in 2016, who each got, I think, less than 2% of the vote. But Gary Johnson probably pulled from the president, and Jill Stein probably pulled from Hillary Clinton. Gary Johnson was a libertarian, Jill Stein was a Green Party candidate. And this is what people say, is that a vote for someone other than the two major parties is what's called a wasted vote. I don't love that term. I don't think any vote is wasted. If you're voting the way that you believe in, that's not a wasted vote. That's you voicing your opinion the best that you know how, right? The reason why people say that is because they're saying you're basically just throwing your vote on somebody who's absolutely not going to win. Well, it is that thought process then that allows that two-party system to persist. Right? So if everybody just voted their conscience, maybe we would see a third party candidate. I don't know. But everyone's scared to do it because people think that, like, so in, let's say 2016, because we had both ends of the spectrum represented in third parties, right? So people who did not like then candidate Trump as a Republican could have voted for Gary Johnson and said, okay, he's close enough to a Republican, right? But if I do that, then I'm taking a vote from the Republicans, and I'm essentially, and I know Gary Johnson's not going to win, so I'm essentially giving it to the Democrats because it should have been a vote for President Trump, candidate Trump then. And then people who would vote for Jill Stein would say, like, well, same thing except for the Democrats, right? Like, essentially, a vote for Jill Stein is a vote for President Trump because you're pulling a vote from Clinton. And you're basically throwing it away and you're giving it to Trump. So that's the argument. And that is not inherently incorrect. Again, I don't like the term wasted vote because no vote is wasted if you're going to actually vote. But that, like, from a strategy standpoint, is not far off at all. All right, so nonpartisan elections. We have, like, the whole back of our ballots nonpartisan this year. This is actually from 2016. I meant to take a picture of my ballot when I had it before I filled it out, and I didn't. So, sorry. All right, so most local and judicial elections, like school board, is nonpartisan. City council, if we were voting on that, which we're not this year, in Marysville is nonpartisan. In some places, it's partisan. Judicial elections are nonpartisan because they're supposed to be independent. Although, like the Michigan Supreme Court, the way that they get nominated to the ballot is by party. So, like, the Democrats nominated two people, one of whom is already sitting on the Michigan Supreme Court, and the other is running for an open seat. And then the Republicans nominated two people. So, like, their state conventions this year, they each nominated people. So they are partisan. They're judges still, or actually some of them are not currently judges. A couple of them are attorneys. But they nominated them out of their parties. One is local. So Mary Kelly, who is the wife of Dan Kelly, who's a retiring judge, she was actually nominated by the Republican Party. So if she wins a Supreme Court seat in Michigan, we'll have some St. Clair County representation on there. All right, so anyway, so they don't have a party platform to identify with. So they rely on two things: incumbency, because if you look at the ballot for this year, like it'll say, like for Michigan Supreme Court, for instance, it'll say, like all the candidates, it'll say Bridget Mary McCormick, who, and they'll say Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. And hers has that name under, or that title under it, because she's already there. Mona Armstrong is running for district court judge. And actually, she was just appointed not long ago to that open seat. But because she was appointed early enough in the process, she gets to have under her name judge of district court. So she's running as the incumbent, even though she's like a 2-month incumbent or whatever. But Karen Vanderhavel, who's running against her, that's a tough race. I'm friends with both of them, and that drives me crazy to vote like that. But she doesn't have that benefit of it already saying. And it's not like Mona says underneath it, like, judge of Michigan District Court for like 2 months. It just says judge. So everybody knows she's the incumbent. They don't know how long she's been there unless they pay attention to it. So anyway, so you rely on incumbency, number one. And number two, alphabetical order. Most people, now it is up to each city officials how they write the ballot out. If you'll notice, if you're in my precinct, which is precinct 3, so I vote at Gardens, Democrats are listed first in every single category. And then I think we do it precinct by precinct. So some precincts list Democrats first, some precincts list Republicans first. If it's a nonpartisan, they'll often go in alphabetical order. And so if you're like one of these people who's like, oh shoot, I got to get to work. Like, I need to fill this that quick. Like, whatever, I'll just take the top 2. The people, first of all, don't do that. Just leave that section blank if you have no idea what you're doing on that. But people in alphabetical order, like, it's easier for the people at the top of the alphabet because they might get filled in first. If people don't know otherwise or don't have anything, have anything to like make them vote one way or another, they might just vote in alphabetical order. But again, don't do that. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, let's see. Functions of political parties, there are many. Organize elections, obviously. So when they organize elections, they're recruiting and nominating candidates. Recruitment is a big deal. Like it's hard to get people to run sometimes, especially like around like this. Our district is a really good example because we're a super, super safe seat for Republicans, meaning that Republicans usually take about 2/3 of the vote in any election here, whether it's for state house or state senate or U.S. House or president or whatever. It's usually about 67% to 33% Republican Democrat. So it's very difficult to find a Democrat to run in the 10th because you're going to spend all this money and you're going to lose, right? And so oftentimes the function of a state party would be to like pluck somebody out of obscurity and be like, you're running in the 10th and we'll give you a bunch of money to do it. Although they won't spend a lot of money on a non-competitive race. Like the party won't, because they look at it like that's a waste of money, right? So, Kim Bison is the one who's running against, it'll be Lisa McClain in the 10th for U.S. House seat. And Kim Bison, you don't see her signs anywhere. And it's not because there's no Democrats here, because if you go up and down, like you'll see, Gary Peters signs, or who's running for Senate, or Joe Biden signs, but you'll see very, very, very few Kim Bison signs. And it's because she can't spend a ton of money campaigning, because the party doesn't put money behind her. And it's a small enough seat, you're not going to get like a ton of PAC money. You're not going to get a ton of super PAC money at all, because people know, A, it's not a competitive seat, B, you're only representing, several 100,000 people. Like a Senate race and a presidential race, that's where the money is. All right, register and activate voters. Fundraise, obviously. If you subscribe to any of the candidate things, which you should, like I subscribe to everybody who's running for anything, just to see how many emails I get. I've set up a different email account for them. But yeah, it's, I mean, every day I'm getting stuff. Hey, could you donate $12? And like, if I did that every time you asked me to, oh my goodness, I'd be broke. They train politicians to be politicians, and they train volunteers to work for them. They do research and they distribute it to candidates. And they kind of tell the candidate where they should be on some things, right? So they make sure that they know what the platform is. Function of political parties for sure is to simplify choices. We've talked about that a whole bunch of times. Like when you go in to vote, you know that kind of who you're getting when you vote for a Democrat or Republican. They help elect those who have turned the party agenda into policy. There you go. So like that's your function. Especially if they picked you to run. So like if the Republicans say you are running in the 10th and we are going to make sure you get elected, but guess what you're going to do? You're going to work to turn our agenda into policy. Like, but what else would you do, right? All right. More functions of political parties. Help unify the electorate. Not really. We're not unifying the entire electorate. We're unifying them in, two nice little areas. Democrats and Republicans. Resolve inner conflicts. The Republican Party does this a lot better than the Democratic Party does. The Democratic Party has some sort of this like moral ideology, kind of like, no, I'm not, I can't possibly, make these sorts of deals. I need to stick to my, to my beliefs and what have you. Whereas the Republicans are like, we got to beat the Democrats. And so, yep, I'll jump on board with that, no problem. And really look no further than the 2016 election, because from the very beginning, up until the convention and beyond, many mainstream Republicans were looking at then candidate Trump and going, what? Like, no, this is ridiculous. But you know what? They all voted for him. And they all now support his agenda because it became the Republican Party agenda because he's the president, right? And so, like I said, they resolve inner conflicts quite a bit better than Democrats do. Come together to take on the opposition. Again, that same thing. Reach out to independents. Again, still 44%-ish of the country would say that they're independent or moderate. That's a big toss-up, right? For people who, and people who follow politics, which is certainly me and, probably you guys too. I know some of you to a big extent, and some of you are just kind of getting into it now. I look at it, I'm like, how can anybody be undecided in this election? Like these two candidates are right? And it is interesting that there are still people who are like, I really don't know who I'm voting for, when there's such a stark contrast between them. But there are independents out there, and their votes need to be won by somebody. Again, they develop platforms. I already talked about that. And they try to stay away from being single issue. That doesn't happen very well, very often. But again, it's like the tide of the country, right? So where are people? What is people's hot button issue? And that's what we're going to talk about quite a bit. All right, so expectations. So each member or each party or members of a party are expected to A, provide loyal opposition to the other party. Okay, so I am this and I don't like you, right? That's it. Do you like you? You're great. Fall in line with their party. Again, even if they don't agree, they are supposed to fall in line. And again, I can use the example of the president. There were not a lot of Republicans who were in Washington who were great fans of his. And certainly, as time went on, that changed. But they are just, okay, well, let's go. This is what we're going to do, right? And the president has what we call the bully pulpit. So he has the national stage. So unless you're also like Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader, and people know who you are, if you're just some random Joe, congressman from the 14th in California or whatever, you're not going to go against a lot of what's happening, because who are you? You don't have a stage. You don't have people listening to every word you're saying. You don't have people showing up in the thousands to see you speak, right? That's why most people do fall in line with the president. The president does not necessarily fall in line with the party, right? Okay. And of course, this is most true during an election year because you're trying to retain seats. There is a lot of talk now that Republicans are sort of pushing away from, not pushing away from the president, but just kind of like ignoring that race, and they're not campaigning for him. They're campaigning for the Senate because they are very worried that the Senate's going to flip. There's only 3 seats, and then it's, you know, goes the other way to the Democrats. And so there's a lot of there's 33 Senate seats in play, as there always is, right? 34 sometimes. And there's a great concern about holding on to those seats. So a lot of people have, you know, moved toward campaigning for those people rather than campaigning for president. Debbie Stabenow, who's a senator in Michigan, who's not up for re-election this year, she was up in 18, is like stomping the campaign trail for Gary Peters, who is our other senator who is up for re-election this year, because he's facing a pretty significant battle with John James, who has name recognition because he ran against Debbie Stabenow in 2018. He did not win, but he got his name out there enough that people know who he is. All right, who is this and why should we know or care? So her name is Lisa Murkowski. She is a senator from Alaska and was one of the only people to vote against the repeal of Obamacare in 2017. Not one of the only people, I'm sorry, one of the only Republicans in the Senate to vote against the repeal. John McCain, of course, was very famous thumbs down. But Lisa Murkowski was like shunned by the Republican Party because they really needed her vote. And you know, she said she didn't agree with it, right? And so like Alaska made this like huge push to, they're like, we're gonna recall her, we're gonna replace her with Sarah Palin. It's like, okay, it's not really how things work. You can't recall senators. The only way a senator can actually like not have their office anymore, I mean, obviously if they like resign or pass away or something like that, but the Senate themselves can expel a member, which is interesting. So you can get 2/3 of the Senate to vote to kick you out and then you're gone, or just don't elect them again, right? But like you can't recall, there can't be like a petition signed by a bunch of people in Alaska to recall Lisa Murkowski and replace her with Sarah Palin. Again, this is not the way the Senate works. Okay, we're the House. All right, so now we have what's called the coattail effect. So the coattail effect is riding the coattails, right? So you're riding the coattails of a popular president. So all of these what we call down ballot issues, or races, excuse me. So senators and congressmen, and it can go down to governors, it can go down to state reps, state senators, all of that kind of stuff will ride coattails if the president in power is popular with their party, which the president right now is very popular with the Republican Party. And so everybody literally falls all over themselves to say that they're like more Trump than the person they're running against. And obviously they are if it's a Democrat, but I'm talking like in primaries, right? So John James was in a primary race, not this year, but in 18 against a guy who, I should remember his name and I don't, which is unfortunate because he's actually from Grosse Pointe, which is where I grew up. But he was running, John James was running against him. And they were, you know, asking who's going to like implement the president's policy agenda. And John James, very famous, he said, I support President Trump 2,000%. And the other guy's like, and all of us math teachers out there are like, do you? Okay, that's interesting. So then the 2020 primary, so this primary for the 10th congressional district, which is our district, saw a very hotly contested race between Shane Hernandez and Lisa McClain. And I've never seen people fall over themselves more to out-Trump each other than those two did. And I'll show you some direct mail examples I got. And I had to like pick 4 from the 10 that I have here, and I threw out probably 2/3 of the ones that came to our house. So there was a lot going on there in that primary race. But again, when you're running in the 10th, the Republican primary is the race. The general doesn't matter. Whoever's in there, Lisa McClain, I was going to kick Kim Bison's spot. Like, it just is what it is. Kim Bison's a lovely person, but she's going to get beat in third. That's just, I'll eat my vote hat if she doesn't. All right, so if a president is popular and endorses somebody or appears to endorse them or simply just doesn't say anything about them that is bad, that can go a long way. if a president says negative things about people, like people have lost their primary races because the president has said negative things about them, even as Republicans. So it does go a long way right now with that party. But it can also work in the opposite way. So if he was not a popular president, and he'll be like, hey, I'll endorse you, people be like, that's okay, all good over here, we don't need it. And if you look at people, like in our district, we are very, like, it's a very pro-Trump Republican district. But like down in Grosse Pointe, Republicans are a little bit different. Like they're not Trump Republicans. They are like, we're rich, don't take our money Republicans. Okay, so people who are running down there don't necessarily want the president's endorsement because those kind of, I'm trying to say this in a way that's not rude, but like they're just not Trump Republicans. And so those people would not look at an endorsement by the president and be like, wow, that really means something, right? Now, if it was George W. Bush, yes, they would have looked at that like, yes, we need that endorsement. Or like Ronald Reagan, something like that, like a very fiscal Republican. Okay, so here's our riding the coattails of the president. Some of these are super small. I'm really sorry, but so this is a Lisa McClain. So this is Lisa McClain, Shane Hernandez. This is another Lisa McClain, another Shane Hernandez. So these are obviously during the primary, which Lisa McClain won as the August primary. So here we have Lisa McClain. I assume she's hugging her husband, wearing a Trump hat. And it says that's why she's endorsed by the 2016 Trump for President Michigan director. So the president has not come out and endorsed her, or didn't in that primary. But she did get endorsed by the Trump for President Michigan director. And then the conservative outsider we can trust to stand with President Trump. Okay, now Shane Hernandez back here is sitting there with a Trump sign in the background. His thing down here, protect life, secure our borders, support President Trump. Those are the three things he stands for, right? Down in this bottom right, Lisa McClain is having a conversation with Mike Pence, of course, who's the vice president. And then this picture of the president makes it look like he was, at a rally or stumping for her or whatever, but that's not. that picture has nothing to do with Lisa McClain, but she's using it. Okay, again, early supporter of President Trump. So this might have been an early fundraiser or something like in 2016. And then lastly, this Shane Hernandez one, President Trump and Shane Hernandez. So here's Shane Hernandez. Here's the president. Again, they're not taken at the same place as these are not taken at the same place, but it is trying to make it look like he has the support of the president, as this is trying to make it look like she does. And so that was it had to be quite confusing for people who didn't really know any difference between the two of them. But Lisa McClain won that because she campaigned better in Macomb County. Macomb County has a lot more people than St. Clair County does. And Shane is from St. Clair County. Shane's actually a really super nice guy. And Lisa McClain's a very nice lady too. But it's hard to win the 10th from St. Clair County. Bill Pavlov did not win the 10th in St. Clair County in 2016. Paul Mitchell did. Again, it's who's from Macomb County or lives in Macomb County, who spends more money. That's all it is. All right. So you may not like political parties, but we'd have to fundamentally change how we do most things in government without the two-party system. The Electoral College would not function the same way, which might be fine, except, if there's a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College, so it has to. The leadership in Congress wouldn't either. All of the committee chairmanships, the majority leaders, the Speaker of the House, like all of those things are tied to which political party is in the majority. The Speaker of the House will never be a minority, like from the minority party, because they have to be voted in. Okay, I shouldn't say that. That's not true. the Speaker of the House gets voted in. And so it's usually from the majority party because they have the majority, right? So technically the Speaker of the House doesn't actually have to be a member of the House, which is very interesting. So some people who were Democrats who didn't want Nancy Pelosi to get the speakership again in 18 because they're like, dude, you're 80, like, can we get some new blood? They voted for Biden. People are like, Joe Biden's not a member of the House of Representatives. Right? We know. That was just we can do that, so we're going to. So that was bizarre. State legislatures, all of them also work on this like leadership majority system, except for Nebraska. They do proportional representation there. Everybody else does not. And then this idea of patronage, or what we call the spoil system in the White House. So when a president wins, they have between like 4,000 and 6,000 people to replace in the White House. And obviously, like a lot of people are what we call like career public servants, right? So they're civil servants, either one. And so they just retain their jobs regardless of who's in power. But there's a lot of political appointees, and those are almost always from the party of the president. And it's just, rewarding people that help the president win the office, right? All right, this is the last slide. Party systems. Major parties, of course, have the best chance of winning elections because of stuff we've already talked about. Money, influence, name recognition, even if the name of the person isn't known, the name of the party is. And then fear of accidentally electing the other candidate. So my friend Jeremy Peruski ran as an independent in the 10th in 18. And he's such a sharp dude. He's so great and had like really awesome like things that you could pull from both sides. Like he was the ultimate moderate candidate. And I love him to pieces, but he had no chance of winning. I still voted for him because I love him and I think he's great. But there's no way that he was going to win the 10th because it's, again, so reliably Republican, but also because people didn't want to vote for him because they're concerned that that would take away from like their party. I didn't have anybody I loved in the 10th. I didn't love Paul Mitchell. I didn't love Kim Bizon. And Jeremy's a friend of mine. And I think he's great. I think he's super smart. And I think that he should be our congressman. And so I voted for him. All right. Minor parties, or like I said, two-party system will likely persist in the U.S. Minor parties or third parties, usually on the far right or left, are candidate-based. Jeremy is an exception to that. He actually ran in the middle, which is, again, why he's not going to win. But we do find multi-party systems in parliamentary governments. All right, now, realigning elections. So, I lied. This is the last slide. So, a critical or a realigning election is an election that, like, reshapes our party system. So, we're looking at things like, expanded suffrage or intense voter involvement, one way or the other. Disruptions of traditional voting patterns. So if you usually vote Democrat, you vote Republican. You're voting, people who are reliably Republican are now voting Democrat, right? So that's a disruption of voting patterns. Changes in the relationships of power within the broader political community. Again, that's kind of also your expanded suffrage. And the formation of new and durable is a key word there, electoral groupings. So it used to be that white high school diploma tradesmen, who usually were union workers, were Democrats, fundamentally Democrats. And over the years, they have shifted more to the Republican Party, and they strongly shifted to the Republican Party in 2016. And if that changes, like if that stays, that's a durable electoral grouping. For a group to just vote one way one year, and then the next presidential election year vote a different way, that's not a durable grouping. All right, so we have crash course party systems for you to watch. So, and I just say this guy's way more interesting. It's section 6.2. That's not a lie. He is. He does party systems and realign elections better than I do. So I need you to go ahead and watch this. There is also a, there's a note sheet that goes with it that I guess I didn't post. So I'll do that. I'm glad I looked at that. So I'll do that, and then you can fill that in as you're watching. That's bizarre. Could have sworn I did. Oh well. That's why none of you have turned it in yet. There you go. Okay. So that is it for today. I'm sorry, my lectures are always so long, but you know, it's important information. So anyway, all right, that is it. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email. All right. Peace out.